Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. I'm back with my good buddy, Simon Dixon. Dude, it's been a while. We got a lot to talk about with this Genius Act. Can you go ahead and first and foremost kind of explain what a stable coin is, and then go into the research that you've done on the Genius Act, and is this something we should be concerned about?
All right. Okay. Yeah. Stablecoins are essentially a blockchain asset that has the properties of Bitcoin, i.e., you can send it kind of as easy as sending an email once you know how a wallet and the system works.
Okay.
But it's more of a centralized system, so it's created by a company, a stablecoin issuer, and it's a promise that is audited, where they say, for every dollar you deposit at my bank, I'll issue $1 of this stable coin, and $1 equals 1 unit. And therefore, you can send this digital dollar around the world. And if you ever want to come to me and redeem it for $1 again, you can redeem it. In the meantime, when they've got all these dollars in a bank, obviously you don't keep it in a bank. You invest it in a dollar equivalent that pays yield. So you end up buying some short-term bills and treasuries.
Yeah.
And you receive yield from your treasuries. They get a digital dollar that they can kind of self-custody, but then it's a centralized company. So it's not like Bitcoin. They can still freeze it or trace it or do things. But you get this digital dollar that you can send anywhere. And the stablecoin issuer gets like a free ride off the US government debt. And so
it's
for
like
example,
a bank that doesn't have to. So it's like a bank that has a zero cost of funding.
Exactly, yeah. And so you could call it full reserve banking, if you like. It's mainly at the moment done by fintechs and crypto companies. And the largest issuer is Tether. There's about 165 billion of them. And to give you an idea, in any one quarter, I think they did about $26 billion of profit, because the higher the bills are that are paying the rate, the more Bitcoin they get to buy. As they buy Bitcoin, they keep it on their balance sheet. They engage in all sorts of other activities with their excess reserves, not the reserves that make up the stablecoin. And, Tether is now more profitable than BlackRock and Citibank with that model. And that's full reserve. They don't even need to engage in fractions.
But is it full reserve or is it zero reserve? Right. And you know where I'm going with that, because if you're a bank, you could say, well, I'm full reserve because I've got loans to offset every single one of these dollars that I just created by lending them into existence. And if you're buying treasuries, I mean, it's the exact same thing, right? Except for lending on a mortgage, you're just lending to the US government. So, when people think of full reserve, in my mind, they see this bank that takes a dollar in and keeps that dollar. They don't lend that dollar out. But Tether, I don't know if they're keeping any of the dollars. I think that they're basically lending those dollars out, let's just say in treasuries, to the government. So in that model, is it full reserve or is it zero reserve?
Yeah, whichever semantics make sense, zero reserve or full reserve, but they are lending it out to the US government.
Yeah.
They do have treasuries. They have assets to match all of their liabilities.
Well, I guess the way to look at it, Simon, maybe would be, do they have risk? Do they have risk? Because if you're keeping that dollar just on your balance sheet and just giving a stable coin and just keeping that dollar there, then you could say the risk is almost zero, right? But if you're taking that dollar, and even if it's backed up with a treasury, then Silicon Valley Bank can tell you you've got interest rate risk, as an example.
Yeah, and I mean, to give you an idea of the risk, that is exactly, it's interesting you said Silicon Valley Bank, because that's exactly what happened to Circle. So Circle, the second largest stablecoin issuer, they audit, they have all their treasuries, but they also had $6 billion at Silicon Valley Bank.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was at the time when Silicon Valley Bank went down.
Wow.
And so there was a moment when people didn't, know, well, what is my Circle USDC worth? And this is the really interesting part. This doesn't require socialized losses or bailouts or privatized gains. All that happens is the unit depegs from the dollar. So the $6 billion, so there was about, I can't remember at the time, maybe it was about a $60 billion market cap. $6 billion represented funds at Silicon Valley Bank. The Fed hadn't said, or FDIC hadn't said what they were going to do yet. And so it depegged by 10%. So one USDC wasn't worth $1, it was worth 90 cents.
To compensate for the risk.
Yeah, and so it's almost like a market mechanism for if you end up with a bad stable coin, the market just reprices it and depegs from $1.
I'm surprised there wasn't a run on Circle, because once it starts dropping to 95 to 90, you would think you'd get panic selling and it would just almost implode. And then they've got to sell everything on their balance sheet and realize the gain or loss. What stopped it from doing that?
Well, very interesting you say that. Yeah, and that is the risk, because they're assuming that their treasuries are worth $1.
Right.
But if they have to dump them at a discount, it's the same thing that happened to Silicon Valley Bank. If everyone's trying to redeem, but yeah, it's a slow redemption process. And then by the time that FDIC said what's going to happen with Silicon Valley Bank, they knew that they were going to get all they were good for those dollars at Silicon Valley Bank, because obviously they had the what was the bailout program called? BLP something.
Oh, the BT, is it the BTFP? Was that it?
BT, bank term lending, something.
Funding program or whatever it is. They have all those stupid acronyms. I stopped paying attention to them when they came out with the acronym MILF. Remember that one? I'm like, who was the guy that was too afraid to whisper in Jerome Powell's ear and saying, dude, maybe you shouldn't use MILF as an acronym? That was one that they had back during the cerveza sickness, we'll call it. So yeah, that's really interesting. I've never really thought about it that way, because you could have like double and potentially even triple layered risk from the standpoint of bank runs. So as an example, it wasn't just Silicon Valley Bank that was susceptible to a bank run. It was also the stable coin that had an account with that bank is susceptible to a bank run. And then if you have those stable coins at another, effectively fiduciary or something like that, then if this one domino falls, then you're going to get mass selling of this, which is going to decrease the price of the whatever asset it's issuing, or liability, whichever way you look at it, which could create a run there. And you have this massive systemic type of risk that I haven't even thought about that, but that's definitely something that people need to consider.
Yeah. So, and that's why, this Genius Act, as it were, became a matter for the Fed or the currency, OCC regulators, because if you think about it, imagine if anyone can take a deposit at a bank and they can convert it for a stable coin. In effect, you'd be like, well, I prefer the risk, because with these stable coin issuers, they publish all the assets. You can see the assets in real time. The market reacts very quickly to what they perceive the price of that stable coin may be in a depegging event. And you kind of have a speculation and an arbitrage based upon the transparency of the assets that are backing that stable coin. And they're obviously audited and stuff. And so
that's another thing that I hadn't thought of, Simon. I appreciate you bringing that up. So let me just explain that to the audience so they can follow what you're saying there. So what happens is, if the balance sheet, let's say for XYZ stablecoin, we'll use Tether as an example. If people can see that in real time, then let's say they go out and buy not just short-term US treasuries, but let's say they buy gold, or they buy Bitcoin or silver or something like that. And that's part of that 100% backing. Then what people can do is they can look at that and say, oh my gosh, they're losing money. Therefore, they don't have that one-to-one ratio, because the value, if you do mark-to-market accounting of the asset side of their balance sheet, has gone down below their liabilities if they had to sell today. So then the value of that tether, let's say, goes to 90 cents on the dollar. But that could be an opportunity for speculators to come in and look at their balance sheet and say, well, it's actually pretty solid, and we think that the value of gold is going to go up in the future, and they're holding gold, and therefore they shouldn't be trading at 90 cents on the dollar. So we'll go ahead and buy it, assuming that the value of gold is going to go up, and then they're going to trade back at par. I mean, this is like a daisy chain, a financial engineering daisy chain nightmare for me.
Yeah, and so you can imagine there was a tug of war where the securities the SEC said, no, that's like a tokenized money market fund.
Yeah,
that can also have commodities in it. And then they were saying, how can you call a stable coin a security? Because then we can't use it as a currency, because then it would only be available to accredited investors. And so there was this, but then the Fed was saying, yeah, but this could create systemic risk in the financial system, because we're dealing with, now Tether is the 18th largest lender to the US government. So these are significant, these are becoming, it's not big yet, but it's a $265 billion market cap.
Right.
And there's within the Genius Act clauses that could unlock trillions of dollars. So it became a real matter for financial stability, for the Fed, for securities regulators, and all sorts of stuff. And just to give you an idea, though, like Tether right now, it's got a market cap of approximately 165 billion.
Right.
And then using the fact that it's investing in these short-term bills, which it holds and custodies with Cantor Fitzgerald, it's been using its yield in order to buy Bitcoin. And as the price of Bitcoin's gone up, it's got enough reserves. It's over collateralized with treasuries, and it's got an additional $14 billion worth of Bitcoin in case there is it ever needed to sell the Bitcoin. And this kind of gets into what happened in the deleveraging event of 2021 when we had the whole market blow up in the crypto scam market. And that was because there was a quote unquote decentralized stable coin called Terra Luna. And then Terra Luna was a lot of the assets were kind of like just a so-called decentralized asset that was backed by tokens, shitcoins, Bitcoin, and essentially Do Kwon that is still being prosecuted to this day. Essentially became like a central bank money manager and claiming that this was a decentralized stablecoin while he was backing a stablecoin by Bitcoin. And then we know what happened, like, when you had the Russia-Ukraine invasion, and then we had the transitory inflation and all those events when the price of oil spiked, inflation happened, then we had the cuts.
Well, to be clear for the audience, they went bust.
They went bust, yeah. That was a $60 billion wipeout, and Do Kwon is no more. And even Tether, back in the, again, I don't want to give too bad an impression, but we went through our Wild West days in our sector. It's professionalized a lot more to now. But there was a day when Tether, they basically they ran out of bank accounts. So they used to have, Wells Fargo basically put a ban on all of Tether's bank account. They were using Taiwanese bank accounts. They got shut down here, and then eventually they could only find like one bank account in Bahamas that would serve them, and they got billions of dollars. They were about to think, how can we withdraw this as cash and dig it in the ground or something? Like literally, it was getting to that level because they just couldn't find the bank. And they ended up with like this shadow payment processor called Crypto Capital. That was like the most dodgy of payment processors. And if you look up Crypto Capital back in the day, the Portuguese, European, and banks basically seized $850 billion from $1 million from Crypto Capital. And so they had an $850 million hole because the government had seized the funds, and they actually ended up issuing a token to plug the gap, and then they ended up buying the reserves. And Tether was like this cat that, with 9 lives that eventually got to the point now where it's able to apply with Genius Act. It's proved the reserves. It's got good custodians, but it was incredible. It was just like a crazy journey from 2014 to 11 years now to where it is today.
Yeah, I always looked at Tether as though initially it very well may have been a scam initially. But what happened is it became such a successful scam that they were able to basically hit escape velocity because they, so many people were actually using it. And I don't think they initially maybe had any intention to be backed one by one or one-to-one. They just said they're issuing all these tethers and just creating this kind of network effect. But if they would have gotten redeemed, 10%, they would have gone bust. But what happened is no one really ever redeemed. And so they just kept this going. They kept buying, and then they made so much money on the asset side of their balance sheet that they hit that escape velocity to where now they're just they're just printing money, and they've got what did you say, 14 billion? That's just in Bitcoin. I mean, I would assume the asset side of their balance sheet is what? I mean, $50 billion more than their liabilities.
Yeah, I reckon
including
they've
their
got.
equity.
Yeah, I reckon they got. I mean, so I should disclose, like, in 2016 there was a hack in their sister company, which was Bitfinex, one of
Okay.
the Bitcoin exchanges, and they had 119,000. Very interesting story. This all comes full circle because they found those Bitcoin in the end, these 120,000 Bitcoin, and the DOJ has got it right now. And that is part of the 200,000 Bitcoin that the American government is claiming part of their strategic reserves.
A reserve? Oh,
but 120,000 of them belong to Bitfinex shareholders. I am a shareholder, so I know that because it was ruled by the DOJ that they're going to be returned to Bitfinex. So, and interestingly, when Trump came into power, sorry, I'm jumping around stories because it's
no, this is really fascinating, Simon.
When he came into power, he pardoned Russ Albright, and Russ Albright runs Silk Road. And Silk Road was where the Bitcoin strategic reserves, other than the Bitfinex hacked ones, came from. And so it's all gone full circle where Trump administration comes along. He's implementing Genius Act to have a regulatory structure around these stable coins. The Bitcoin strategic reserves is their strategy. 120,000 of them go back to Bitfinex shareholders. And Russ Albright was released from prison and pardoned, which makes up the other Bitcoin, which is the current American Bitcoin strategic reserves. So we've hit this crazy this crazy stage and been involved in this crazy story of getting to the point where we are right now. But I happen to know that throughout its lifetime it was a banking problem, and at various stages they couldn't. Well, they just couldn't get the bank account, the stable bank account.
Why were they so secretive about disclosing or doing an audit on the assets?
Pick your conspiracy theory.
Okay.
But they would say that they couldn't get an audit because no audit would put their reputation to it. No auditor would, which kind of is true, knowing the history of auditing. And then at the same time, I'm sure in their journey of running an exchange, recovering from these hacks, having Tether that started as this tiny little $5 million market cap token that nobody would use. They had to beg, like Kraken was the first exchange to adopt it. Coinbase wouldn't touch it. But eventually they created like this arbitrage token. And it was once Binance launched that they really got escape velocity, because Binance launched in 2017 with no bank account. And so suddenly this exchange was like, hey, we don't need to worry about a bank account. Let's trade everything against Tether. The ICO boom happened where all of these shitcoins and tokens and the entire shitcoin casino opened up. And suddenly billions and billions of dollars was coming into Tether. And Tether acted as the bank account for Binance. And then as this market cap was going up and up and up and up, you're going through the ICO bubble, Bitfinex got their bank account shut down, and they were just literally hitting the stage where there was no bank that would receive the money, and then they had to custody their own assets. And you can imagine initially they weren't buying high quality treasuries. I think at one point they had a bunch of like China commercial paper and various other products and gold and all sorts of stuff. So I imagine that while they're okay with an attestation, but if you had to audit the past, I'm sure there's lots of skeletons that they would rather just say, that's a part of the past.
Yeah. But to be clear, now, I mean, it doesn't matter. Assuming that they've got the assets that they most likely do, their assets far, far exceed their liabilities minus the equity.
And they own the largest private Bitcoin mining operation in the world. So they're and I mean the sheer number of assets and investments that they've made. I mean, this is this is a private company, that is larger in scale and profit than Citibank and BlackRock.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best banking model in human history.
Yeah.
because you have a banking model where you pay $0 on your liability. You don't pay an interest rate, and you don't really have to worry about demand deposits. You don't have to worry about interbank settlement. You don't have to. I mean, it's perfect. It's like the perfect banking model, which begs the question, Simon. You're talking about how it got to a point when they started to team up with Binance, where they didn't really even need a bank account, because basically the Tether were trading as the reserve asset. And so this kind of, it's an interesting rabbit hole, because then you start to ask the question, okay, well, if this is possible, then what is base money at the end of the day? Is base money bank reserves and Federal Reserve notes? Maybe, but maybe not, because if the system, like the Eurodollar system, starts settling and trading in a dollar denominated asset, but yet it's just bank credit, and that is seen as something that is fungible with, or just as good from a risk standpoint as those green pieces of paper or as the bank reserves, then the dollar credit the banks are creating actually becomes base money, just like that Tether for a certain period of time, and maybe even today, would be effectively the base money within that ecosystem.
Yeah, it fundamentally changes a lot, which is why they had to be really careful. Because if you had an exodus of bank deposits with a user experience where you could convert it to a stable coin, obviously that's incredibly disruptive as a model. And as bank deposits are converted to stable coins, you're essentially, affecting the money supply.
You
And
go into that, Simon. Yeah, definitely. Please do go into that, because let me just, I'll tee it up for you here. Guys, if you take, let's say just Tether, and let's assume that Tether was as widely accepted as the US dollar. Let's just assume that right now. So if you take your dollar, give it to Tether, then they're going to give you a Tether, which you can use as a dollar. It has $1 worth of purchasing power. But then they're going to take that dollar and buy a treasury, so that dollar goes back out into the system and circulates. So now you have two tokens, let's say, that are, from a purchasing power standpoint, are a dollar. You can buy Chipotle with them. You can buy Starbucks. You can pay your rent, whatever it is. So you've just increased the number of currency units chasing goods and services. You've doubled them. So walk us through walk us through how that works and potentially what the risks are.
Well, essentially, yeah, you're eliminating a bank deposit. You're paying some. Well, I guess you're moving it from the bank that would be integrated with a stable coin, and then you're moving it over to the stablecoin issuer, and the stablecoin issuer now has the treasury. So it kind of messes with your head.
If it's Tether, so they're taking in a dollar. They're giving you basically a dollar of Tether, and then they're taking that dollar and then sending it back out to buy the treasury.
Yeah,
so now they've got the treasury, but now you've got $2 that are circulating when before you just had one.
Yeah, and then the interesting stuff is what it does on the payment rail. So, the way, so for example, we run a global business, and without stable coins, we pay our contractors in Philippines, Vietnam, India, and they all take stable coins. Like some of them are okay to take Bitcoin, but some of them want stability where they can, not have exchange rate risk.
And you pay them that way, Simon, I'm assuming because the friction is so low?
Well, it's the key difference is that it's firstly, you can take your stable coin, and while it is still a centralized company, so if you're committing crime, you're doing money laundering, they could freeze it.
Right.
Or they could they could sanction a wallet address, put it on the OFAC list, and then if you try and spend it from that wallet address, then people are meant to freeze it and have a notification. So it's not Bitcoin. It's not where you have the private key, but you can extract it from the stablecoin issuer and hold it in self-custody as if it were Bitcoin.
Right.
And so because I have it in my private wallet where I own the key, it's no longer like a bank deposit where I go to the bank and say, will you pay $1 million to this person? And they say, well, hold on. Let's wait till Monday. You've asked on a Friday.
And then charge you for it, by the way.
Yeah, and then I'll go to the compliance team, and the compliance team says, okay, can you send me the invoices? Can you give me the source of funds and source of wealth?
Right.
And you go through this whole process, and then eventually they say, yep, okay, you are innocent. So you're guilty until proven innocent in the banking system. With a stable coin, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
So I can send it, and anybody else that has a wallet address, I can send it to their QR code, and they can receive it. And then they'd have to go through a court process of sanction it, saying to Tether, please freeze this. But in the meantime, we're all transacting 24/7, no requirement to have anyone in the middle. And we're creating immutable records of all of our transactions, as you would with any blockchain asset. And so it moves as an innocent until proven guilty system, which means that if I want to pay staff completely legitimately in the Philippines, Vietnam, and India, then I'm not trying to get this banking system to plug into that banking system and persuade Swift to be happy with this transaction. And then they just say, oh, no, we don't like Vietnam. It's too high on our risk model. And you end up with your account shut down. So we can pay our staff anywhere, anytime, at any moment, knowing that these are legitimate transactions with no permission. And so it is a significantly superior system. And what it also does is you don't need a point of sale terminal as a merchant. You just need a QR code.
Right.
And so it transforms the payment rails to QR code. So everyone can just become a merchant, start accepting stable coins, and you don't need any middle people or any permission from any MasterCard, Visa, or any type of merchant processor.
And if you want to, you got an easy off ramp, because you've got the Tether, let's say, or the stable coin. And then through your app on your phone, you can just go ahead and sell that and get the dollars if you want them, and then just deposit that into your account. So it becomes, that's what I was talking about when I was referring to friction, a lot less friction. And it really highlights something that I say all the time. When you look at a currency or money or whatever you want to call it, most people look at it strictly through the lens, or a lot of people on Twitter, let's say, look at it strictly through the lens of a store of value. That's really, it has to be a store of value. But in reality, in the real world, people rarely gravitate to a currency just because it's a store of value. They gravitate to a currency because it has utility. And it is true that a store of value is a component of that utility, but it's a very, very small component. Network effect, as an example, is something that I think is vastly, vastly more important. And then the reduction of friction, to your point. And that's why you're using the Tether, let's say, as opposed to the dollar, is because it has more utility for you. So I don't want to get off on a tangent. I just wanted the audience to kind of think about, at the end of the day, why do people use A currency versus B currency? And 99.9% of the time, it's because it has more utility.
Yeah, and there's one more interesting component that will bring us into Genius Act, is that, right, once you have this programmable money and it's backed by treasuries, some people will say, well, I want my, stable coins the leader, Tether's the leader in the market. What can I do differently? Well, why don't I pass on some of the yield? And so you have these tokenized, let's call them real world assets, which are like, even BlackRock came out and said they partnered with a company called Securitize that I invested in. And they said, we'll tokenize this money market fund. And so once you can take the money market fund via a blockchain and programmatically receive daily yield via a stable coin on the blockchain, you've now got a real-time deposit that you can hold in self-custody that is paying real-time yield, and you can programmatically convert the dollar yield as it comes in through a stable coin into Bitcoin. And so you've got a dollar that generates Bitcoin for you.
Yeah. So it's basically like having a bank account that pays you an interest rate, and that interest rate is automatically turned into Bitcoin.
Yeah. So you can programmatically create these interesting scenarios, which is why Genius Act came along and said, no, we don't, we don't want people converting their bank deposits to stable coins without us deciding that we want to do it. We don't want people paying yield. We don't want Circle and Tether doing it. We want JP Morgan to do it. And so they said they introduced a series, a bunch of legislation that obviously the bank lobby and the crypto lobby were kind of competing. The crypto lobby is like a new faction of. It's interesting because Bitcoin has no company or CEO, obviously, it's decentralized. So very few people will lobby for Bitcoin. But if you're Ethereum and you got a foundation, or if you're Solana and you got a foundation and you pre-mined your coin, suddenly you want to engage in the lobby game because you want stable coins to be on your blockchain. And so suddenly this crypto lobby has emerged, which doesn't have a Bitcoin lobby. And so suddenly when the Trump administration came along, about 150 million was raised, for the Trump administration through the crypto lobby. And so now they're up there with the military industrial complex, the military lobby, the bank lobby. And so now you have this new emerging lobby, but it consists of mainly the pre-mined shitcoiners, let's call it, that are looking for adoption of their blockchain. And so you ended up with this whole thing around the election where it's like, yeah, we're going to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but maybe we want an XRP strategic reserve and a Solana strategic reserve and a Cardano strategic reserve.
That reminds me of Trump's, remember when he was tweeting about that and or True Social, whatever the hell you call it. And he was tweeting out that he's going to set up the reserve and he was listing all of the currencies, but then he forgot like Ethereum and Bitcoin. It's like an hour later, he's got to come back out and say, oh, and also, of course, I meant Bitcoin and Ethereum. You're like, dude, how much did you get paid for that tweet?
Yeah, that was hilarious. And there is very genuine like corruption claims when you start getting into Justin Sun and Tron and then the Trump administration, well, the Trump family, let's say,
right.
They have, it's quite interesting. You have Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick. He handed Cantor Fitzgerald over to his son to run as he was getting into politics. And then Trump kind of said, yeah, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, you run this new company called World Liberty Financial. And who's the envoy to the Steve Witkoff? His son is now part of World Liberty Financial. And World Liberty Financial is the Trump family's company, and what they did is they launched their own stablecoin. And so there's this real interesting thing where it said in the Genius Act, in order for any Congress member to have a stablecoin, that's a conflict and you can't do it. But it didn't say the president can't do it. So the president's allowed to do it, but no member of Congress is allowed to do it. And what you've actually seen is these really interesting transactions. Well, I don't know if you call them interesting, corrupt. We'll leave we'll leave that to be figured out.
Suspicious.
But, yeah, very suspicious. That basically World Liberty Financial did a token sale. The token sale wasn't going too well. They were launching their own shitcoin for this DeFi service. And then suddenly Justin's son, who's the founder of a blockchain called Tron, who's got a very suspicious record, to say the least, he said, I'll put like 100 million in. And then suddenly the token sale was oversold. And then suddenly his SEC case went away, which was being investigated under the Biden administration. And when Trump went across to his Middle Eastern visits, you had the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund was going to invest $2 billion into Binance. And Binance has about 270 million users. During the Biden administration, they were taken out. CZ had to go to prison for 4 months, negotiated a deal. But suddenly, the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Qatari Wealth Fund say, we want to invest in Binance. And World Liberty Financial went over and said, hey, how much are you going to invest? And they said, we'll invest $2 billion. And so they said, all right, I've got an idea. You put $2 billion into World Liberty Financial. We'll issue USD1 stablecoin, $2 billion worth of it. And then we'll invest the USD1 into Binance. And we get to buy all of those short-term bills.
Right.
And now the Trump World Liberty Financial is getting about 60 million per year. And the higher the short-term debt gets, the more that they make in World Liberty Financial off these stable coins. And so as Trump is doing these deals, these tariff deals, these offshore investments, there's this whole crypto play that's happening at the same time. And the higher the rates, the more profit for World Liberty Financial at the same time as this whole drama that's happening between Powell and Trump to get this 300 basis point, cut. So it's very interesting how this, crypto and Bitcoin has kind of found itself at the center of the largest power plays that exist in the financial system now.
What's that George Carlin saying? Do you remember that one? It's something like, it's a private club and you're not in it. What you just described makes us realize, Simon, that there's a private club, and Trump, you can love him, hate him, whatever. Trump, his kids, the people in Dubai or the UAE, Saudi Arabia, wherever it is, Tether, CZ, they're in this club, and us plebs are not, to say the least. But there is definitely a club. That is for sure. So let's go back to the Genius Act. And the other day when we were on that Twitter space, you and I were trying to think through, what does it mean that the banks like JP Morgan can actually use their bank reserves to back these stable coins? And for me, why that's important is because I'm a person that doesn't really think the banks need to settle on the Fed's balance sheet. In other words, they don't really need bank reserves to go ahead and settle interbank transactions, especially in the Eurodollar system. So whether the bank reserves are 3 trillion or 4 trillion, I don't really think it impacts bank liquidity. I don't think it impacts global liquidity. So if they've got these bank reserves that they don't really have to use, then they can issue stable coins with the backing of these bank reserves. But then what that does is that allows the Federal Reserve to take base money, which are bank reserves, they're the dollar liabilities of the Fed, the electronic dollar liabilities, and turn them into broad money. Where right now, let's just say the Fed increased bank reserves by $1 trillion. That doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an extra $1 trillion in broad money. But if these stable coins are used as broad money, fungible with dollar denominated credit that the banks create right now, or green pieces of paper, whatever, then the Fed would have much, much, much more control over the broad money supply, which at the end of the day is most important, because those are the currency units that are chasing goods and services. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg based on what we were talking about, but I'll hand it over to you and let you take that ball and run with it.
Yeah, so there's a few things to unpack in the Genius Act that most people aren't talking about. So firstly, it came as a package of 3. There was Genius Act, which is mainly focused on stablecoins. Then there was Clarity Act, which is still being negotiated, but past the initial stage, which is around, do you have to register with the SEC, or is it the CFTC, and all of that regulatory? And if you're a token, who do you have to get? And basically it hands over to the SEC the ability to determine whether something's a commodity or security or sufficiently decentralized. They're basically going to be the certifier of whether these coins are accredited investors like securities or cryptocurrencies that anyone can invest in. And the third was an anti-CBDC act, which is interesting. So obviously in Europe, they're beta testing in October the digital euro, which I would classify as a central bank digital currency. It's issued by the European Central Bank, and it's going to be, integrated, and it will be a CBDC in the classic sense of the word. Controlled, programmable, the surveillance 1984 nightmare that we've always been warning about.
Are they talking about a wholesale, retail, or both, Simon?
I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but
okay.
They're looking to beta test. It will probably be wholesale initially and then move over to retail.
Okay.
And it'll be an iterative process. And, so that's what's happening in Europe. So we're going for, here's the full surveillance state nightmare 1984, typical where Europe's going. Then in America, we've got a different model, which is kind of the covert CBDC. And the covert CBDC is the usual model, which is the Federal Reserve is owned by, when you go layers down, it's owned by the banks, essentially, which are the shareholders. And then once you're in that club, you get an account with the Fed. And there's JP Morgan being the most important. there's the few things in the Genius Act which are worth pointing out. So the first is what you said, that there's about $3.5 trillion held by the banks at the Fed. That at the moment is normally the reserves, which is, the overnight lending, repo markets, or whatever you need to do to make the system sound or safe. You can actually issue stable coins against those reserves. And so now a bank like JP Morgan, they'll have their normal fractional reserve system, creating credits, all their digital dollars in their account, but their reserves can also be a stable coin. And to also give it additional edge, if you have a banking license and you have a Fed Reserve account, you're able to pay yield on that stable coin. Whereas if you're a non-bank and you don't have an account with the Fed, you can't pay yield on that. They also put in there that
it's illegal.
Sorry,
it's illegal for a non-bank to pay.
In Genius Act, you have to be a bank in order to pay yield on your stablecoin.
So they're just putting everyone out of business except for the banks.
They're trying to make everyone a bank and give the banks the head start. This is the consolidation of the market.
Yeah.
And obviously this was the bank lobby piece. So the bank lobby
so
piece.
They pick the winners and losers.
Absolutely. And I believe that essentially JP Morgan has already had their stable coin for massive wholesale transactions. It's very opaque and very hard to see, but something's happening for a long time at the institutional level. I think basically JP Morgan are the chosen one to kind of have a covert central bank digital currency, but it's not a CBDC. It's a privatized stable coin that has that special relationship with the Fed, that has a competitive advantage with the Fed, and they're kind of like the beta test for what does this two-tiered model look like. And so you can use your and then we talked about all the risks with stable coins, but now that applies to the funds at the Fed. So what new risks is this introducing into banking? Is this depletion of reserves? Are we moving to additional attack vectors? And I don't think much of the conversation around this, because everyone was so excited about bringing stable coins and making America crypto capital of the world. I feel like those conversations were around the table without the crypto bros, as in a creature from Jekyll Island type of meeting.
It's because most people don't understand the plumbing behind what you're talking about, Simon. And if you don't understand the plumbing, it's just like the teacher in Charlie Brown. You want. You just focus on, what you do understand. And that's just kind of something that's like a tether type of equivalent, but that it's just issued by JP Morgan. Going back to what you're saying, I've always said that in order to have a central bank digital currency, or in order to have I don't want to call them features, but in order to have the Orwellian, draconian type of big brother features the central planners would want, you really need to have the accounts on one ledger, because then that ledger is going to get the data in real time to know what your social score is. If you've got, to have multiple ledgers, it becomes very, very difficult to get that real-time data. So I always said that we've got to realize that the foundation for a CBDC is everyone having an account with the Fed. That's one reason why I asked you with the ECB, the wholesale and retail. But in order to have the draconian Orwellian 1984 features, you don't necessarily have to have all the accounts with the Fed. You just have to have all the accounts on one ledger. And if that one ledger is JP Morgan, and JP Morgan is reporting and giving the social score, it's the exact same thing. And they can also issue credit based on narrative. This is what we were talking about the other day. One of the things, they can issue credit based on narrative instead of merit. And what I mean by that is they can issue credit based on your social score instead of your credit score. And the reason they can do that is because if everyone has an account with one bank or one ledger, they never have to transfer a deposit liability. And if they never have to transfer a deposit liability, they literally don't need assets. And therefore, they don't need to be paid back. That's why the Fed can't really go bust, but they can have negative equity. So, and as you were talking, Simon, I was thinking that through, and I'm like, well, if JP Morgan is issuing a stable coin, let's say JP coin, then how would I use that? Like how would I, in order for me to use that as payment, let's say with you, I'm buying something from you, you would have to have the ability to accept that JP Morgan coin and to use that JP Morgan coin, even if the payment rails are on the on Ethereum or something. And in order to do that, then you would have to download the JP Morgan app, and effectively you would have to have an account at JP Morgan. So in order to use the JP Morgan coin, you have to have an account with JP Morgan. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. So you have your account with JP Morgan. They control the interoperability between the bank deposit and the stablecoin. They issue the stablecoin. They do some kind of transaction that puts it out in the market. I mean, maybe it's the next bank bailout. You know, you used to have $10,000 here. Now download this app, and you've got your stablecoin. Whatever mechanism is used
Right.
after beta.
Right.
And then all you need at that stage to spend it is everyone just needs to use QR codes on the rails. These stable coins don't really care about blockchains. Like if you look at Tether, it's on every major blockchain. So they do some on Ethereum, some on Solana, some on Tron, some on Cardano. And so it's kind of irrelevant in that sense.
Okay, so if maybe I wasn't understanding that correctly, Simon. So if I have the JP Morgan coin and I wanted to send it to you for payment for goods and services, would you need to have an account or download the JP Morgan app, or you would just have the QR code, therefore you would accept it, the JP Morgan coin would live on the ledger that your downloaded app, whatever that is, has access to, but would it necessarily have to be JP Morgan's ledger?
Yeah, once you're out, so JP Morgan could have their own ledger. Like, you know, the XRP army would be saying it's all going to be done on Ripple, you know.
Right.
But JP Morgan, the reason it's not going to be done on Ripple, just as a tangent, is because 50% of XRP is on Ripple Labs' balance sheet. They're not going to make Ripple Labs the company, the Federal Reserve. It's not going to happen. So we can put that one out. And but they could either have their own blockchain, but this then goes into this whole ETF pay. It was kind of like they did the Bitcoin ETF, the most successful ETF of all time, and then they did the Ethereum ETF. Now, suddenly, around the time with Genius Act, Ethereum starts recovering after years of underperformance to Bitcoin. And then suddenly, we're getting loads of Ethereum going into these Ethereum ETFs. Now, Ethereum is what's called proof of stake rather than proof of work. In a nutshell, proof of work means that you don't get a vote by owning Bitcoin. With proof of stake, you get a vote by owning Ethereum. And so if more and more Ethereum goes into the ETF, BlackRock picks up all these Ethereum, and it just applied with the SEC to be able to stake it. Once you stake it, you govern the network. So we're having almost this competition amongst ETF issuers to own the stakes of these blockchains like Ethereum, which would then we're kind of creating this new network of people that own the Ethereum rails or the proof of stake coins via ETFs. Then anybody that wants to receive, I just need to have an Ethereum wallet in order to receive that stable coin. I don't need an account at JP Morgan.
Okay, so that answers my question. So when I want to do a whiteboard on it, and I appreciate you walking me through that, because that's obviously I need to explain that on the whiteboard video. For just the normie that's out there, Simon, that is concerned about freedom and liberty and free market capitalism and all the things that we value, what should they be paying attention to? What should they be putting their foot down for? And what is just noise that they should be ignoring?
So I would say, I think it's too late.
Okay.
Because while people have been distracted with, I believe the Big Beautiful Bill plus the Genius Act has actually given all the tools of apparatus for the 1984 scenario. So if you look what's been happening behind the scenes, you had the whole we're going to pay down the trade deficit, and you had the Doge and Elon Musk theater. Eventually, Elon Musk says, all right, it turns out you can't pay down the national debt because it would cause a recession. But
they raised the debt ceiling limit too.
But exactly. So in the meantime, what have we got? Well, we've actually consolidated all of the data of all the different departments, and we've given it all into one database, and we handed it over to Palantir.
Oh, I was just going to say Palantir. Yeah.
Yeah. So now Doge has handed over all the data to Palantir. In the big, beautiful bill, there is a budget which you're paying for, America, which is going to consolidate all of the different departments, whether it's health, whether it's IRS. It's all going to be creating one single ledger. And Palantir is the artificial intelligence producer. Elon Musk, who's highly likely to be launching his stablecoin soon, he's obviously got XAI, the SpaceX data. He's got all the data from Tesla. So now you've got driving data, social media data, artificial intelligence, all of the data from all the different governmental departments. And I imagine that Palantir is going to be the one. Now, what else has Palantir been doing? It's actually been powering all the wars in the Middle East. It's been doing crowd control in Saudi Arabia in the Muslim annual Hajj meeting. It's been doing the surveillance state in the UK, pulling together Department of Defense, National Health Service. It's been doing much of the contracts across the European Union. It's been doing the integration with the drones in Ukraine. It's been doing the border control contracts that are now integrated with the private ICE, private military and prison contracts.
Right.
And Palantir has been selected for all of it. So Palantir, with the combination of the two PayPal mafia, Elon Musk plus Peter Thiel, is pretty much all of the data. And you know that these social networks have backdoors to NSA, military, and all that stuff. So the Orwellian data nightmare to build the social credit score and a global social credit score is here. And that was all handed, and you're paying for it in the big, beautiful bill.
So Simon, then unfortunately, I think it's worse. What you're saying is so fascinating because it reminds me of a whiteboard video I did a long time ago, but I remember it well. It's when I was talking about the World Economic Forum, and I was explaining how they're basically all Marxists at the end of the day, and among eugenicists and a lot of other bad things, but but the Marxist component of it, if you're someone who believes in socialism, communism, Marxism, and you're smart, you realize one of the problems is you can't allocate resources efficiently, because in order to do so, you need the price discovery, you need the price signal that you get from the free market. And what I explained in the video was just this idea I had where they would use, first of all, CBDC, so they centralize all the data, exactly what you're talking about. And then they would use artificial intelligence to crunch the data in real time and have the artificial intelligence tell them how to allocate resources, scarce resources with alternative uses, without having to have a free market price signal or without having to have free market price discovery. And what you're saying is exactly what I was talking about in that video, where if you were Klaus or whoever's running the show here, and you're a Marxist and you need a workaround for the free market price signal that works so well and how to allocate resources, consolidating the data, seeing it in real time, and then overlaying AI, and then just letting the AI determine your whole economy, that's your solution.
Yeah, and who does the Federal Reserve, what technology do they use for their artificial intelligence? BlackRock, Aladdin. Who do Treasury use for their fiscal data? BlackRock, Aladdin. Who does the ETF provider have a board seat on 20,000 different companies across the world? BlackRock. And so if you look all of this, who's the biggest shareholder in Tesla and Elon Musk technology? BlackRock. Who's Peter Thiel and Palantir? BlackRock. You know, so if you put this all together, who owns BlackRock? It's a public company owned by State Street and Vanguard. And so you've got the asset managers at the top of the chain, Trump plus Elon Musk plus Peter Thiel has put together all of the data and created the artificial intelligence data. And BlackRock is managing a portfolio globally right now that is able to say, right, you know, here's your ESG score, here's your carbon credit score, here's your whatever score. So, and, you know, then you look at who paid for the Trump administration, Elon Musk, you know, the crypto lobby, which was the shitcoin casino bros rather than the Bitcoiners. Then you had the Mellon banking family, and then you had various other interests. So you can trace the lobby money, you can trace the banking lobby, and JP Morgan's got the Covert CBDC, and BlackRock's managing all the assets, and the technology companies are bringing all the data forward. So the Trump administration has done it.
They're all part of the club, Simon. They're
Absolutely.
all part of the club, and you ain't in it, my friend.
Absolutely.
Now you can sit there as a viewer, you can disagree with what we're saying, you can have a different opinion, but the one thing you cannot deny is there is definitely a club, and none of us are in it. That's I think the main takeaway from this whole interview. Simon, tell us about where the viewers can find out more about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I go live every week on YouTube. My channel is Simon Dixon, and I go live. I just track the events in Bitcoin, macro, geopolitics, tie it all together every week. I mean, it's just unbelievable, George, how much content there is right now, right? Literally every week is a new movie.
Yeah. That's a double-edged sword, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason me and George got together after years of doing is because we were on X, and I try and jump up on these X spaces. So you can follow me on X at Simon Dixon Twit. And I got a blog, simondixon.com, where I try and condense all of these different topics into something a bit more manageable.
Okay, buddy. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for your time. Fascinating discussion. And I can't wait to do it again.
Okay, thanks, George.